Why is plant blindness important then? I know it's a term that you are very familiar with and understand deeply. What can we do and how can we do it, in terms of the radical work that you are doing? Why is it important to make change? Why is it important for human perceptions and therefore, perception input, behavior output? Why is it important for humans to change our perception and then subsequently change our behavior?
Yeah. Well, it totally connects with the other perspective of cognition itself. So if we subscribe to the dominant view, which is, the input-output and very linear, and the brain is the thing, the property or the organism that allows for cognition to happen, so intelligent behavior in general, then there is no discussion. It's like, if we think that is true, then plants can never be cognitive or intelligent. The problem is data are showing something else, so then we have an issue. But there is an alternative that has been actually all along available, and there is, especially the philosophers, there is plenty of philosophers who are working in that field. And the idea of cognition not as a property, but as a process. And from that perspective, the cognitive is represented by the body, the internal physiology, and that includes whether you've got a brain, great. If you don't have a brain, who cares? It's like whatever physiology you're using, in whichever form you are, that is part of a picture that includes that, the body, and the environment. So cognition then is seen as situated, embodied, embedded, and from that perspective is a much more grounded reality of what behavior and intelligence really, what are these things, right? And if we, the reason why I'm very attracted to that is because obviously that kind of theory can explain why I would see plants doing what they do. And so obviously it's more encompassing more life forms. And I think that a theory that can unify all the different systems is probably a much more powerful theory. I don't know if it's correct, but it's a good start. So we have the starting ground. And also, according to that view, while the first model would see perception, cognition, action or behavior as isolated units, in some of the cognitive philosophy, they call it the cognitive sandwich, where you got the two pieces of bread and the middle, and the things are separate things, so they don't really interact much. While in a more in the more situated cognition approach, what you have is that all those systems are open, so everything is talking to everything, and in that sense, is more of an analog system. And the reason why this would be really important from a plant blindness perspective, and the bird had enough. So I guess the reason why I'm very attracted by this approach, this alternative approach, beside the fact that he explains the data, or he could explain the data, while the first approach doesn't, and automatically exclude them. I'm attracted by it as well because in the context of plant blindness, this is a model that actually intrinsically highlights the interdependence of the human as the body and the physiology with its environment, which of course includes all of the relationship, whether this is a bird or whether it's whatever, whatever other. And not only that, but I think it takes even a step further. If you really get into that model, what I'm taking from it is there is actually no other. And that's the most important thing. It's like if when you are, seeing a plant and you see it as this other thing that is over there, if you really understand that the entire system is open, then you actually know that that is you.
Yeah, so this is like a basic conventional philosophical problem, isn't it? That we still gravitate towards the subject object, those dyads. It's like the human in the landscape, which is the very plant blindness problem in a nutshell.
The landscape.
So in a way, your model is that more of a relational model where all the forces, all the energies, every single species, every single interactive process and element and energy movement is kind of got the same status. And so
exactly.
Is that kind of where your model is moving towards? And then I guess my second question is, how does this sort of distributed communication and distributed, situated, embodied model, how does that work?
Yeah. So first of all, it's not my model.
No,
I'm definitely embracing it, and I would like to apply it to a more empirical approach.
Okay.
And I have been in conversation with philosophers who do work with this model from a philosophical perspective. And I have plenty more to learn. But this is what I'm sharing is more my intuitive understanding of what this model could actually do. And by applying it to, by combining it with empirical data, then we can really validate and really see how far can we push the model. You know, we already know that the traditional, the dominant view, by just doing a few simple studies with plants which don't have a brain or neurons, is already pushing the model out of its space. You know, so this new model, which is, as I said, not new, it was an alternative model that was always there. I feel it would give the space for explaining things that the other model is failing to explain, basically. Whether that is the appropriate model to describe what's happening or not, we will see. But there is definitely the space and the potential, and this is what I'm interested in, I guess. And from a more cultural aspect of it, the potential of thinking in this way, rather than box and separate, entities, it changes completely how we see our own place in the constellation of all these others. And that's the point.
Well, now that you're talking about the culture and otherness again, so this model, the idea of this model, your interpretation of the model, is that there is no other, that everything is connected and interconnected and interwoven.
Yeah.
The really, really interesting thing about your book, Thus Spoke the Plant, is that there is this other worldly or just not non-conventional, non-human, exactly, recount of what has happened to you in your life from your early, work with fish when you were doing your PhD. So, that kind of ecological evolutionary work, and then moving more into plant behaviour. There was that book really took a huge amount of courage, I suspect, on your behalf, because when you move out of those conventions of those disciplines of science, or whichever discipline you're working within, if you have the courage to move outside those worlds and to be open, as you say, to allow different kinds of influences in, to actually embrace the other, so that there is no other, as I say, it's an enormously courageous thing to do. And I think that I was very worried when you first started writing your book. I was worried about your reputation as a scientist.
Of course.
And I was worried that, your that the whole kind of evidential work that you've done might be discounted, and that this hasn't happened. And instead everyone has embraced your book and absolutely loves this very personal story, because I suspect that's been a hindrance to science in some ways, and I know a lot of other scientists as well who say, I'm just not good at communicating this stuff. I love being in the lab and I want to be able to communicate it, but I find it difficult to do that. So in this book you've done that, but has there been a cost?
Well, we'll find out.
Well, so far
maybe
it's been good.
It's too soon, I don't know.
But can you tell me or remind me, just very briefly, how the plants spoke to you and informed you in your work?
They've done it in many ways, and I guess it becomes part of a practice, and so as you pointed out perfectly, is like it demands that we dismantle those ideas of where the boundaries are between disciplines, for example, between, you know, what we think the human is.
Exactly.
And it doesn't mean that the human doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that the plant over there doesn't exist. But at the same time, that's also true. And these are kind of understanding and knowing that can only be experienced. And, you know, it reminds me, I gave a lecture a few months ago, and I brought up the story of Galileo. And now, you know, at the time, well, 100 years before Galileo, obviously Copernicus had already suggested that, oh, maybe, you know, it's not the sun that rotates around us, but it's actually the Earth that rotates around the sun. And it wasn't being crucified for it or anything. Actually, if anything, the church, because he was a priest of some kind, the church really encouraged him, write your bloody book. And he actually brought the theory up just before dying on his bed of death, you know. So then the question that I was interested in is, okay, so here is a scientist at that time, and he's writing a book about what we would perceive like, oh, the church would be very controversial about this, and then Galileo comes up 100 years later, and he gets totally like, you know, vilified, and you know, Galileo died in house arrest. And so I would say that the same church that 100 years earlier was like, come on, write this theory, now is wanting to kill someone for it. Well, the church wasn't upset about the theory. The theory was not the problem. The problem was that Galileo was providing data. And so it wasn't any longer a theory. It became like, well, for what I can observe from my personal experience, I'm learning, and so I'm acquiring knowledge that brings me closer to the truth of things. And of course, the problem was like, the church as an establishment has always been interested in being the keeper of the truth. So you can't have this. You can't be the one that just goes off on his own and find your own truth and knowledge through personal experience. But really, that's why Galileo, we still remember him, and this is why he changed the world. Because it's only through personal experience, I think, that we can really understand the world around us and get closer to any truth, which is always going to be relative to us. And so I guess the book for me is kind of that. It's like, okay, this is my personal experience. As a scientist, I know how to apply the method. I know how to do science. But science is just that. It's a method. It's not a doctrine. It's not a church. So as a scientist, I can apply the method, but I cannot any longer deny the input that my subjective experience has in the making of science. I am part of my science because I'm there. I am part of my experiments because I'm there. And by acknowledging that, I'm able to be even more objective than by pretending that I'm not. And yet my subjectivity is still affecting what I'm seeing.
That's right. We can't get outside our humanness.
Exactly.
We can try not to be so anthropocentric about it or human-centered, you know, at the cost of other species. But we will never escape our humanness.
And why would you? Like,
because
human,
we are,
so.
and the interesting thing for you and me, and we've written a paper together, for instance, is that storytelling is critical to any information, communication of any idea or concept or theory or science, isn't it? So, which leads me, I guess, to ask you, where is the story heading you now? Where are you going next?
Well,
what's the next thing for Monica?
We are writing the story as we go, right? So who knows? What I am interested in is to, well, I guess, and it connects a little bit with what you were saying before. I guess I was very afraid of writing the book, and then the book arrived and the book is out, and then, you know, and there is a part of me that is still kind of expecting like retaliation any moment soon. But exactly, it's like, okay, here we go. But it hasn't happened yet. And in a way, as the time goes by, I feel more and more encouraged by the fact that, like, this is who I am. And I'm not afraid to be the scientist that I am. And if science means that it needs to be defined in narrow terms only, then I'm not that kind of scientist. If I can be the scientist that is exploring and allowing for things to arise, even when they totally contradict my own system of beliefs, I feel that that's the role of science. And how more objective can I be when I can put into question my own belief system? So I guess the next step is to make sure that I am grounded in that, so that whatever it is that I'm doing next comes from that place. And I am very interested, again, growing into the collaboration with all these other aspects of knowledge, because I feel that, you know, one lens is not enough to explain this amazingness.
And is that why your next book, The Mind of Plants?
Yeah.
An edited volume, to which I'm contributing a chapter. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how that evolved? I think it's the third volume.
Of a series, So it's with the same editors, and this time, while the first two volumes, the first one was about, it was the green thread, and was about like connecting different aspects of knowledge across different disciplines. The second one was the language of plants, and we were like asking the question like, what is this? Is there an appropriate language? What are we supposed to be saying when we talk about these things, and how we can express this? But both of those volumes, we're really happy about them, and I think that they're really good books, but they're very much academic books. While this third one is going to be about the mind, and not just the concept of the mind, but literally how the mind of plants and the mind of the human, and also the minding as taking care, or the unminding, like when we don't care, how do those concepts interact with the personal story. So we have asked everyone, and that's the idea of the book, of like, don't go into your, you know, philosophical, academic, whatever, just bring it down. We want a story, and we want you in the story. And because, as you said, stories are so powerful, and they are able to deliver things that they are able to reach where science or philosophy fail with their abstractions. So stories have that power, and if they're embedded in the personal, we can all relate. So then it becomes also my story. And so the book is good in that sense, that we are aiming for the wide audience. And it needs to be for everyone, because we need everyone to get this, to understand that, you know, there is more than what we have been believing. And as you said again at the very beginning, I feel if we can get that sense of care, of minding and looking after, nurturing things again, because it's part of our nature. So it's not that we have to become something else.
No,
it's just
a rediscovery.
Exactly,
really.
just reignite that aspect of us, that care. I think that a lot of the world problem that we are facing at the moment will be no problems. That we just like, oh, we just don't do that anymore because we care.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking forward to, so we've got the aesthetics of care, but you and I have been talking about the aesthetics of cure, and the idea that plant blindness is an affliction that we, by talking and publishing and performing experiments and analysing that information and sharing it, might be a way to cure this affliction of human nature. And you and I are entangled, and we will
for that I'm very concerned.
But we are planning to do some aesthetics of cure ourselves together, and I'm really looking forward to continuing our entanglement together and finding out what happens next. So I thank you so much for speaking to us today, Monica.
No, thank you. And of course, as I said, it's like by default the entanglement is inevitable. So thank you.